What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and welcome to Archery in Unreal, the brand new mini-series where I'm going to show you how to make your own customized archery setup, including weapon assets, customized animations, and putting it all together in Unreal with the code. And in today's video, we're going to start off with making the weapon assets, so let's go ahead, open up Blender, and start doing some modeling. So I have here a fresh scene in Blender, and what we're going to do is we're just going to drag and drop over, highlight everything, and delete. This way we can start making our bow. Now the easiest way to do this is to use Blender's curve modeling, so what we're going to do is just go Shift A, go down to curve, and we're going to add in a path. This way we have a nice straight line that we can mess with. However, it's a little large for anything scaled to the epic skeleton, so we're going to go S and 0.5 to half size it, and this is just a good starting point, but you can always rescale it later. Once you have it sized, we're going to go tab into edit mode, zoom in a little bit here, and we're going to go box select the 3 middle vertices, right click, subdivide, and then we're going to go Control I, and this is going to inverse the selection. Now why we want to do this is because this gives us these two endpoints that we can go G and Z and drag them down. This way we get a nice curvature for our bow without messing with our origin point, because when it comes to making game ready assets, origin point makes or breaks an asset. Now once you have a nice profile for the curvature that you like, what we're going to do is go to the object data properties with this little green icon here, go to geometry, and then we're going to set the extrude to 0.04, and we'll go down to bevel under depth and set it to the same value of 0.04, but also make sure to select on fill caps. And what this will do is give us a nice start to this geometry of our bow. Now once you have this all set up here, we're going to tab back into object mode, right click on our curve, and we're going to convert to mesh. This way if we go into edit mode here, you can see we have faces, edges, and vertices, full geometry that we can play around with. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the proportional editing tool, highlight it real quick, and make sure it's active, 3 to go into face selection mode, and then what we're going to do is we're going to hold Alt and select on any one of these faces, and this way it loop selects the end here. Now I'm sure as you're seeing, we don't have the back of the face selected here, so we're going to use C on our keyboard, and we're going to do a drag select. So we're going to press and hold the left mouse button and just drag over this section, and it'll highlight it all for us. If we zoom out here, we can start scaling this down, but if I hit S, you'll see the proportional editing tool is going to go right to the origin point, which is in the middle of our bow. It's a little too large for what we want, so we want to scale this down a little bit to right about where the bend starts on the bow, and then go Z.2 on our numpad and hit enter. So basically what we're doing is we're scaling it along the Z axis to a value of 0.2. Now because the proportional editing tool is on, it gives us this nice profile on the end of the limb. So we can do the same thing on the other side because we used a constant value. So we can just go Alt and loop select this area, C, and then select this area, and then we're just going to go S, and then you can see that the proportional editing tool is still sized properly, so we can just go Z.2 and enter. And now we have a really nice symmetrical lineup for our bow limbs. Now the next thing we need to do is make a little bit of a grip, so this way our character can actually grab the bow, because right now it's a little too wide. And the easiest way to do this is to just look for wherever the straight faces are, which is going to be right about from here, and we're just going to go holding Shift and Alt together, and start clicking down on these top faces. Now you can select on the bottom faces here as well, but if you select the middle faces, you're going to get this. So don't select the middle faces. Make your life easy, select one of these smaller faces, and just go down the line. Now, one thing that might happen is if you double click like this face here, you can deselect and select with this. So, you might find yourself accidentally deselecting something. And if you do, just go back and reselect. It's not the end of the world. Now, once you have everything lined up to where it starts to curve, we're going to zoom out here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn off proportional editing. And then we're going to hit E and then S. Then we're going to go Shift X. And then we're just going to drag our mouse inwards a little bit. And this is going to create a little bit of a separation in the geometry, and it's going to start scaling in that section to give us a really nice looking start to our handle. But as you can see, it didn't do a lot, but that's okay. Because once we have the start, we can hold Shift and then tap R to repeat the process until we get a handle style that we like. So something like this looks good for me, so I think that's good, but you can make it smaller or larger depending on what you're looking for. So now that we have that set up, I'm just going to click off and go back into object mode, and we're going to take a look, and I think that's a pretty good start to our bow. Now you can see that the shading is a little weird, and that's just due to the fact that it's a low topology model. So what we can do to fix that is just right click and then click on shade flat. This way everything is going to look a little bit more proper and more what it's going to look like when you load it into Unreal Engine. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our bowstring. Now this is going to be a very simple cylinder, so what we're going to do is just Shift A, go to Mesh, and we're going to add in that cylinder. Now we also want to make sure to scale this down a lot, G and Z to drag it down, and then we're going to go RY90, so this way the faces are pointing along the x-axis, which is where our bow limbs are pointing. Because now what we can do is we'll just keep scaling it down with S, and then we'll go S and X to scale it out, scale it down again, S and X to scale it out. And we're doing this because this way it keeps the diameter, making it look more rounded, but while also increasing its elongated nature, making it more look like a bowstring. And then once you get a size that you're happy with, you want to make sure that the string length is roughly just under the length of your bow limbs. So something like this is going to be good. And the diameter wise, you're going to play around with this a little bit, but just get something that you're happy with for your starting point. Because once you do, you can just go G and Z and drag it up and slightly clip into the base of the bow. Now, as you can see here, I've got it clipped a little too much. I'm going to drag it down a little bit, something like this, because this way, as you can see, it's attached tip to tip. So now that we have our bowstring in position, we're going to go Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to add in another cylinder, and this is going to be the start for our arrow model. And this is just to make it so we can actually get our bow knock created on our bow. But we need our arrow to be able to know where the position is and where we need to cut out. So we'll take the cylinder and scale it down, and now for the scale of the arrow, what you want is something that's roughly double the diameter of your string. So this might be a little too big, so I'm going to scale this down a little bit like this, and that looks about double diameter. So once you have that scaled properly, you can then just go S, Z, and scale it up. Now, cool thing is, the closer you are to the object, the faster it scales. So as you saw out here, it doesn't do a lot, but if I go right close to it, S and Z, I can now scale super fast. So something to keep in mind, the closer you are to the object, the more it's going to scale. Now, if I go into my bow here, you'll see that it clips in, but it doesn't clip in heavily. Like, it's not all the way through on both sides, and that's perfect. So what I'm going to do is go to my bow, tap into edit mode, and look at where the last face that it's intersecting is. And that's going to be this face right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this face, and we're going to basically take all of these faces around it out. So what we can do is C on our keyboard, and we're also actually going to do period or delete on our numpad. This way it'll zoom in and allow us to be able to rotate around this area a lot easier. But then with C on our keyboard, we can take this face and then the face above it and look at the line in the middle. Align that cursor and then just drag along to select both sides of the face. Now if you right click, press and hold the middle mouse button, and you can just rotate down, press C again, and then just keep going until you get everything selected. So you can see that the face that's intersecting on this side is exactly the same. So this also helps us line up to know exactly where to stop on our selection section. Because from here, what we're going to do is delete and faces. And this way we get a nice little cutout. But we are going to need to fill this in because now it just looks like a hollow bow. So we're going to tab back into object mode, select our arrow, H to hide, go back to our bow limbs, and back into edit mode. If you press 2 to go into edge selection mode, what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these edges here, and we're just going to highlight them. Now make sure it's just the rim here. You don't want to select anything on the interior edges, otherwise it will create weird geometry, because we're going to be manually filling this. So with all of these edges selected, stopping where the cutout stops, we can just press F on our keyboard to fill it, and there we go. Now we have a nice harsh edge here as well that we can use for our lineup. So I'm going to select this edge and then hold shift and select these two edges here. Two edges, not the ones underneath it. And then we also want to make sure to select that connecting edge and then have to fill again. And then we're just going to go around and do this all the way around. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is going to disable, realistically, your ability to do loop cuts because we are not lining up the pre-existing geometry lines to our fills. So if you want to make it so that way you can do extra modeling and have the ability to add in loop cuts that go all the way through, what you're going to need to do is do this fill process, but edge by edge. You'll have to do them individually, piece by piece, rather than doing them all at once. This, realistically, you don't need to do any additional modeling on this, so if you're just following along, just do this, but I'm just letting you guys know that if you go back and try to do any edge loops or anything extra to create extra geometry and you can find issues, this is going to be why. So I just want to let you guys know right up front. But now that we have this cutout in place, we can go back into object mode, and you can see that we have a nice little cutout here. And if I go Alt-H to bring the arrow back in, it actually looks really nice. And then go G and Z, just kind of drag it over. And you'll see that this sits really nicely right on the knock. It's good and lined up. It's not too far over. It's a really nice looking position. So now what we need to do, though, is we need to apply the scale to our bow. Because if we go to the transform properties here, you'll see location data and rotation data is still zeroed out, but scale is set to 0.5. Before we start doing any rigging of any kind, we want to make sure that scale, location, and rotation are all properly zeroed out. Now, scale is technically zeroed out as 1, but location and rotation should always be 0 before you start doing any animating. So what we're going to do with the bow limb selected here, we're just going to go Control A, and we're just going to click on scale since that's the only thing that we've changed, and this will make it sure that the scale is applied appropriately. Now on the bowstring here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do Control A, and we're just going to apply scale, not location. And then we'll go over to our arrow here, and we're going to do the same thing. But this time, what we're going to do is we're going to apply all transforms. We want to apply scale, location, and rotation. So that's just for the arrow. Now that we have all of our transforms set up and our pieces in position, there's just one last thing that we need to do to the bowstring. So if we look here, you can see it looks like it's still not quite in. So I'm going to take this and just drag it up until it's just barely on the inside, just like this. And now what we can do is we're going to go to the bowstring, tab into edit mode, and we're going to look at where the bowstring is intersecting with the arrow. Because what we're going to do is create essentially the cinch. So it's going to be the place where it's still flat on the bowstring, just to kind of, I guess, fake the arrow being what's pulling back the string. It's just to create a real look. If you guys don't want to do this step, this is just a small detail that I like to add in. If you guys don't want to do this step, feel free to skip it. It's not like crucial. You would want to add in a loop cut, but the extra step's not necessary. So what you're going to want to do is, with it in edit mode, Control R, add in the loop cut. And if you're not wanting to do anything else, stop here. Just align your loop cut right in the center of the thing here, of the arrow, and you're done. However, if you want to create a more of a proper cinch on your line, what you can do is tab into object mode really quickly, hide your arrow, back into edit mode, and grab your loop cut. Because this way what we can do is we're going to go Control B, we're going to bevel it, make it really, really, really big. Alright, so we're doing this so that way we can get back to it easier. Back in object mode, Alt-H, unhide the arrow, back to the string, and tab back into edit mode. Now if you're not doing like a tutorial, you can realistically just add the loop cut without hiding the arrow, but I was just showing you guys like the two different ways depending on how far you want to go on it. But if you're creating the cinch, just what you want to do is create even exposure on both sides. And this is just using G and X, by the way, is how I'm moving that. And then S and X to scale it in. And we're just going to keep kind of scaling and moving slightly until it's basically the diameter of our arrow. There we go. Now we're all set. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start doing the fun part, the rigging. So we're going to go Control A, add in an armature. Now we want to scale this down a lot because these are way too big by default. As far as what size you go for, it's really just something like this. I'm not going to give you an exact value, but I mean, this one is 0.115. So if you want a value, 0.115 is what I'm going to go with. But realistically, you can use whatever you want. Now, before moving it, now you're just scaling it, so don't move it, just scale. But now, once you have the scale, tab into edit mode, A to select all, and now we're going to start moving the bone. Because this way it keeps the origin point of the bone right in the dead center, and it's just going to make things easier for us later. So what we're going to do is also go to the running man icon here, which is the object data properties, just to make things easier for ourselves. Go to viewport display, and then click on in front. This way our bones will be shown in front of our model. So what we can do is RY, and we're just going to rotate this roughly until it's kind of the lineup. And then we're going to go G and X, G and Z, just so we can put it into our arrow or into our bow here. And then just go RY again. And what you're going for is essentially you want this to be lined up facing the direction this way and have it positioned roughly on the start of the bow. Now, one thing you can also do is if you go into wireframe mode with this icon up here, this actually does help a lot because what you want to try and do is set it up so that way the ball here is going to intersect on where the start of the bend is going to be. So for me, I like doing this kind of right about where it starts, like where the bend starts here. So it's going to start up here, 1, then 2 down, but it's really up to you on how you do this. You just want to make sure that it's within reason of where an edge loop is, because then what we're also going to do is we're going to scale it so that way it's also lining up on another edge loop on the other side. So something like this. This way we have it hooked in here and it's lined up here. This way 1, 2, 3, 4 sections of faces are then going to be controlled by this one bone. Because now what we can do is we'll just select on this little end piece here, 1 on the numpad to go into orthographic side view, and then we're just going to start extruding bones and remember making them kind of line up to an edge loop as best we can, and we don't want to go too crazy. Now one thing I do recommend is making one single bone for the end. So don't make it so that way this bone is going to be on its like 2 different sections. You want to make it so it's just this end section, and the reason why is it just creates a better look on the bend. Now once you have all your bones in place here, we're just going to drag over them all, make sure they're all highlighted, Shift D to duplicate, G and X, and then R, Z, 180, and this way it rotates them and faces them the opposite direction. And then we're just going to go G and X, and then we're going to go and line these up. Now, because we made sure to line these up on the edge on the other side, we can do the same thing here. So we're just going to make sure that this is lined up, and that looks pretty good. So now we have bones on both sides, but we have a few more things that we need to create. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the IK bones, and this is going to be what bends the bow. Don't freak out if you've never used Blender's IK system. It is so much easier than Unreal Engine. I wish I could, use a lot of animation tricks you can do with IK and Blender and import them into Unreal, but I wish Unreal had a better and easier setup IK system. But that's a different rant for a different day. So while we have these two bones selected, and that's just selecting one, then holding shift, selecting the other, we're going to do shift D to duplicate, G and Z to drag them down, and then alt P, and we're going to click on clear parent. This is going to make it so that way they're part of the overall armature, but they're not parented to anything that's currently on this bow itself. Now what we're also going to do is just find any nub, doesn't matter, just click on any nub here, and I'm going to go E and then Z just to bring it down, click on the newly created bone, alt P, clear parent, G and Z to drag it down, and then just align it to where your arrow is, because this is going to be the bone that actually pulls your string. So we want to make sure it's roughly right where the arrow lineup is, because we've positioned the string pull and everything else off of that lineup. So it gives us a nice point to start with. So now that we have all of our bones created, we're just going to quickly name them to make it easier for ourselves as we go along. So we're going to click on the top section of bones here, first one, and then I'm just going to go to the bone properties here with the little icon here. And then go up to the top where it says bone. I'm going to type in top, highlight it, Control C. This way it's on my clipboard. And I'm just going to put 1. Then go to the next bone, Control V, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we're just going to do the same thing on the other side. Got the bottom section of the bow here. So we're just going to go bottom, highlight it, Control C, bottom 1, bottom 2, bottom 3, 4, and bottom 5. Now, once we have that named up here, we're going to go to the other bones here that we created for the IK. So this one's going to be top IK. And this one here is going to be bottom IK. And then this one here is going to be our string pull. So we're just going to name that exactly that. So string pull. Now, the reason why we do this is because we're going to manually apply the vertex groups. And this is just because it's actually the fastest way to do this. It's not because it's like, oh, it's the most accurate or technical way. It's not. It's just the fastest way to get the best results. So now that we have everything named in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into object mode with tab. We're going to turn off X-ray mode, go back into solid view, and we're going to click on our bow and tab back into edit mode. Now, if you go to where the object data properties are, which is a little upside down triangle here, you're going to see an area that says vertex groups. Now, there's none in here right now. I'm just showing you guys where it is. This is going to be where we're actually going to assign everything. So if we go back into object mode, click on our bow, shift click on our armature, Control P, and under armature deform, click on with empty groups. Now, if we go back to our bow, you'll see vertex groups have been added for each of those bones that we've made. So what we can do is go into edit mode here with tab. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold shift and alt together and start just assigning faces to these bones. And we're going to use the loop select to make it easier. So while in face selection mode, hold shift and alt together, and then just select the faces that the bones are mostly in. So like I wouldn't want to select this face or this face because the bone ends here and starts here. So we're going to go to the top section because this is the bottom of our bow. So we'll go to the bottom section and we'll just assign bottom 1. And then we're going to click off to deselect everything and then just keep going down. So this is going to be bottom 2. And then we'll click on assign, bottom 3, assign, and then bottom 4, assign, and bottom 5. Now before you select bottom 5 and assign it, make sure that you go with C in the selection tool and drag over the backside here, because we want to make sure that's selected as well. So we're going to go bottom 5 and assign. Because now what we're going to do is just basically the same thing on the other side. So we're going to go selecting all of these bones here, go to top 1, assign, then selecting these here, top 2, assign. Then here, top 3, assign, top 4, assign, and then top 5, we're going to loop select, C, get the drag selection tool, hold the left mouse button, and then there we go. Now we'll just go ahead and go to top 5 and click on assign. So now we have the whole sections of the bow highlighted, but we still need to do our string pull. Now the reason why we did this separately is because when we go and assign things, it's actually going to try to assign sections of the string that you don't want. So rather than going through and removing sections, if you do it in stages, it actually works a lot better. So now that we have our limbs selected and all of it highlighted and assigned to bones, what we're going to do is tab back into object mode, click on our string and shift click on our bow limbs here, so that way it's the active object, and then Control J to join them together. Because now what we'll do is we're going to tab back into edit mode here, and what we're going to do is we're going to look for that area of vertices that loop cut section that we made. So we're going to go into X-ray mode, C to get our selection tool, and we're just going to click on this area with all the vertices, because Even though we're in face selection mode, when you're in X-ray mode, it's actually going to show faces as little dots. That's going to be where the faces are separated. So like you got little dots here, and then if I scroll down, you're going to see we have another section of dots here this is for this section of faces. So with this selected here, we're going to go down to string pull and click on assign, but we're not done yet. We also want to make sure that we pin the ends of our string into our rig as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of zoom in a little bit, and we're going to look for that face here, because this is the face that we want. So this is the bottom of our bow or the top. Let's see. So this is the bottom. So what we're going to do is with that selected, go to bottom 5, click on assign. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And this way it'll pin these faces in, leaving the rest of the rest of the string able to be moved. So again, we're going to go top 5 and click on assign. And now what we can do, if I go out of edit mode into object mode with tab, and then I go and I just turn off X-ray mode, I can go click on the armature here, control tab to go into pose mode, and then if I click on this bone here, G and Z, you'll see that now our bowstring is animated, or we can animate it, right? So everything is pinned properly and we can start doing some cool stuff. But we still need to make the IK setup, and this is, like I said, stupid easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just zoom in on one end here. So we got these two and we got the other side. So we're going to go ahead and just we're going to select on the bottom bone here, and then we're going to shift select on the bone above it. So the IK bone is the non-active layer, I guess. And then we're going to go shift I, and you'll see add IK, and just select to active bone. Now, as you can see, it creates some weird deformities. Don't worry about that, because what we're going to do is click on the little yellow bone here, go down to the bone constraint properties here with this icon here underneath the green bone. And then what we're going to do is see where it says weight position, uncheck that, and then check rotation. And as you can see now, there's no changes, but we are going to make changes and make it very easy for us to animate. So we're going to go down to the other side though and do the same thing. So we're going to get our IK bone, shift select on our main bow bone, and then just shift I, add IK to active bone. Making sure to unselect weight position and check rotation, and there we go. Now we have our IK set up. What we can do to make these rotations happen on the IK bones really easily is we can go R, Y, and we go -30 on this side. And we go R, Y, 30 on this side. And this way we now, if we take this middle bone here, we draw it back, we have that nice little bend on the bow limbs itself. Now you can change this value a lot. So like, let's say for example, I wanted it to bend in a little bit more. Highlight both of your IK bones and scale along the x-axis. This will bring them in towards each other. Because now if we go RY 30, you'll see the bend is a little bit different. And then we go RY -30. So I mean, it's not that different, but it's different enough. And I mean, realistically, you don't want it to be heavily curved. It's, you want it to be somewhere in the middle of that bend. And realistically, you can mess around with the rotation values really easily, but the reason why we set this up is because if we go back to our IK target, you'll see influence as an option here. We can actually turn the influence down to 0, and as you can see now, the limbs aren't being pulled. So we don't actually have to create rotation data on the IK bones to be able to do the animation. We can just set it and then animate the influence instead. And what I mean by that, just so I can show you guys really quickly, is if I click on the draw bowstring bone here, and hit I, and then keyframe the location, and then go to each of these IK bones, and then hover over influence and press I. This is to animate their current value. Go to 30 frames in, set the influence to 1, and then do the same thing on the other side. And then take the bow draw, G and Z, and drag it back. And then keyframe location. This is again pressing I, and then just hitting location. If I bring it back, you'll see that now we get a really nice looking drawback where the string is being pulled and the limbs are being affected from that pull. All right, so now that we have the bow totally modeled here, what we can do is we're just going to drag and drop over the bow here and H to hide. This way we can just start working with the arrow model here. Because what we're going to do is we're going to add in a few different meshes to be able to make the overall model for the arrow, but we're going to try to make it as low poly as we can. This way it doesn't lag your game when you're firing off multiple arrows. So the easiest way to do this is we're going to go Shift A, and we're going to go Mesh, and we're going to add in a cube. Scale it down, duplicate it, drag it off, because we're going to need 2 of these. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drag this down to the bottom of our arrow shaft here, and we're going to scale it down, and then go S and X, and we're going to position it so that way it's roughly in the center. And again, using period or delete will allow you to focus in on an object, so this way we can kind of see where we are on our lineup. We want to get it as even on both sides as we can, then S and Z to scale it, I think that looks pretty good for a starting size. We are going to make this, we are going to scale this in though. So we're going to go S and X, and we're going to scale this in so this way it's inside of our arrow. And then move it over a little bit to center it, and there we go. We got a good start, and this is going to be the fletching on the arrow. Now we're going to add a little bit more detail to this, so we're going to tab into edit mode, hit Control R to add some loop cuts in, and we're going to add these. So when we do it, we're going to go scroll up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then we're just going to left click and right click. This way it drops them right in the center. And then we're going to go to the side here, Control R to add another loop cut around the edges here, just like this. Now the reason why we do this is because we can go 2 to go into edge selection mode, and we're going to select one of these long edges here, and we're going to go Control B, and we're going to bevel them. And the reason why we add those edge loops in is because it actually stops the bevel from going too far. This way we can just scroll up on our mouse wheel, get a nice rounded edge, and then just left click to apply. And as you can see, it stopped it right in the middle, right there, and right here. So I can do the same thing on this side. So I'll take this edge, Control B, bevel it, and basically just drag my mouse off like a madman until it stops. So we'll do the same thing on this side, Control B, bevel, and then again, Control B, and there we go. Now we have a nice rounded edge to our fletching, so we can just take the selection tool with C, scale it down a little bit so that way it's not too big, and then just drag it along the bottom here, because we just want these faces. Because then what we'll do, actually no, I'm sorry, we want to take the top section here. So we're actually going to go and do the same thing, but we want to do it to the top side. Because then what we can do is SY, and we're going to cinch it in until it's got, so it kind of clips into the arrow like this. Because we want to make it so it looks like it's part of the overall arrow. And I've always found that if you just get the scale first and then cinch it in after you've done your bevels, it creates a better look. Because then what we can do is just take this, Shift D to duplicate it, RZ 90, and then bam, now we have the 4-way fletching with some nice rounded edges. Now the last thing we need to make is going to be the arrow head, so we're going to take this cube over and we're actually going to add in a cylinder as well, because we're going to need this later to help give us our overall arrow shape. So what we're going to do is take our cube and we're going to drag it up, over, and down, and scale it in. So this way it's a bit of a better size for the starting. So what we'll do is SY, and we'll scale this in. Now, you don't want to make this too small. My recommendation is make it just slightly larger than the diameter of the arrow shaft edge. So we'll go ahead and just kind of zoom in a little bit so I can get a better idea of where we are, and we'll just keep kind of sliding this over. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tab into edit mode, click the top face here, and then we're just going to go S to scale it in until it gets kind of like rectangular, and then S and X until it gets square. So we're going to go a little bit more like this. So once you get a square, go back to regular scaling like this. This is the easiest way to get a really sharp looking tip on your arrow without sacrificing extra geometry. So now what we need to do is we're going to go take our cylinder and we're going to use this actually for cuts in our arrow, because arrowheads actually have a little bit of a rounded bottom to them. So we can use cylinders to actually create a really quick bowl cut that'll give us that nice look that we want. Just take it and drag it up until it's roughly in a good spot. So now we'll just go ahead and we'll duplicate it with Shift and D, G and X, drag it over. And your goal is to try and make it so that way it's as even as possible. So if your cutouts are a little too far on one side, just drag one over until it looks right. So like for me, I think that's going to look pretty good. Might want to drag this one in a little bit, this one back a little bit, because then we'll take both of these cylinders, select one, shift select the other, Control J to join them, click on our arrowhead, go down to the modifiers tab, add modifier, click on Boolean. Under object, go to the eyedropper tool and select under cylinders. Go back to the Boolean modifier, hover over it, Control A to apply it, go to your cylinders, and delete. And there we go. Now we have a nice looking arrowhead. Now we do have to make some minor adjustments here, so we're just going to take it and move it back along the y-axis a little bit to center it. And then we'll also scale it in the y-axis a little bit, so that way it's a little bit more size appropriate, and we'll do the same thing on the x-axis until we get something like this. Because now, look at that. A really nice looking arrowhead, and we have some really nice looking fletching. So if I go Alt-H and bring back in my bow, just go and hide the armature here, you'll see that we have a nice looking arrow and we have a nice looking bow. And as I showed you guys before, we have some really good looking draw kind of bend happening on both the string and the bow limbs themselves. So now the last thing that we need to make is just going to be the quiver, and honestly that's the easiest of them all. So what we're going to do is we're going to Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to look for a cylinder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to scale this down, drag it over, and we're going to go to our arrow, and And we're going to join everything together because we need a copy of this arrow and we don't want it in multiple pieces. And realistically, it's not supposed to be multiple pieces by the end anyways. So we'll go ahead and we'll click on the fletching, get both of these selected, then the shaft, and then the arrowhead. Make sure the shaft is the active object though. So maybe fletching, both fletchings, arrowhead, and then the shaft. And then just go Control J to join them together. And then we'll take these, Shift T to duplicate it, and drag it along the y-axis. This way we can use the arrow that we have as a size comparison for our quiver. Now, one thing I suggest is just make your quiver slightly shorter than your arrow, because this way when you put it in, it's going to stick out a little bit, and you want it to stick out a little bit because we want to make it so that way the character is going to be able to grab the arrow, so we want part of the fletching to be exposed. Now, this isn't really facing the right way, so I could technically go RY 180, make it face the other way so I can see what the fletching looks like on the outside. But once we have this and we were happy with, the overall scale and size, we can start doing some basic modeling. Now, I will say this looks a little bit too narrow, so I'm going to go S and then Shift Z, so this way it increases its overall circumference, and I think that's going to look a little bit better. If you want a thinner quiver, it's up to you, but I like a little bit more, so this way there's more heft to it. Now, what we can do, though, is we're going to tab into edit mode, Control R to add a loop cut, and we're going to add one here at the top, just leaving a little bit of space, and then again at the bottom. Now, what this is going to be is it's going to be kind of a bump out on the top and bottom for the quiver, while the interior here is going to be flat and flush. Now, before we do the bump out, though, we're going to go Add Modifier. We're going to click on Solidify, and we're going to set the thickness to 0.2. And then we're also going to go click on the face here, so 3 to go into face selection mode, click on the top face, and then delete faces. This way we have a nice opening for our quiver without having any extra geometry. So once you delete that, just go over to Solidify modifier. You're going to need to be in object mode though, so tab into object mode really quickly, hover over Solidify, and then Control A to apply it. Now if we go back into our quiver here, edit mode with tab, and then what we're going to do is go into face selection mode with 3, and then we're going to Alt and loop select this top section, and then hold Shift and Alt together and select this section. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to go E, S, and then hold Shift and Z together, and we're going to create that bump out I was telling you about. Now, as you can see at the start, it looks really harsh. Now that's okay though, because we can use a bevel to be able to make this look a little bit better. So what we're going to do is go into edge selection mode, Alt, and click on an edge here, and then we're just going to go Control B, and we're going to bevel this. And we want to make it so that way it's not too harsh, so something like this, and then we're going to take the bottom side and do kind of the same thing. Now, what I recommend is making your geometry even as best you can. So you can see how, you can't really even tell that this face is not the same as the rest of them. Not really, anyways. And this is just going to make your overall geometry and the model itself look better. So what we can do is just go again, bottom edge here, Control B. We'll bevel it until it kind of gets onto the inside, just like that. Then take the other side, Control B. And then we'll do just like what we did, making sure the lineup is somewhat similar. And then you just want to do the same thing on the interior as well. Otherwise, by the time, because we are going to use Shade Smooth on this one, by the time you're done, it's actually going to create some really weird shading. So we're just going to go ahead and do a slight bevel here, just like this. And again, trying to keep the edges somewhat similar. Because now if I go back into object mode, right click, Shade Smooth, look at that. Now the bottom looks a little bit weird here, so we can take a look at what's going on with that. Alright, so the issue for this is actually being caused just from some overlapping vertices. So what we can do in edit mode here, just A to select all, go M, merge by distance, and then what you're going to want to do is set the value for merge to 0.005, because it will remove some vertices here, and you'll see that now we get that nice flush section. So it'll fix that shading issue. It's just because there's some overlapping geometry is what would cause the issue there. But now we have a nice looking quiver. So what we can really do is we can take this arrow and we can take it and duplicate it again, take all 3 of them. This is basically to create the fill for the actual quiver itself. So one thing I always like to do is create a group mesh of arrows. And just realistically, it's just by selecting random arrows and then drag, drop, duplicate. And this way it actually has some kind of circumference on the inside of arrows, and then you can just basically highlight all of these. So I'll get a better position. Drag and drop, select over all these arrows, Control J. Drag and drop over all of these. Make sure to shift select on at least one of these, and then Control J. And this way it's one arrow mesh that you can use to fill your quiver while you're in game. This way you can have full quiver and then empty quiver when you don't have arrows. So that's it for today's video, guys. We now have the arrow model, we have our bow set up and rigged, and we have our quiver and our arrow static mesh. So in the next video, we're going to go over how to be able to get a character from Unreal Engine, put him into Blender, and start creating our own base hand-modeled animations. Now, we are going to be using the IK system, so I'm going to show you guys some really cool stuff to make some really cool animations very quickly. You'll be able to make what almost seem like motion capture type animations, but you'll be able to do it in like under an hour. It's insane. So we're going to go over all of that in the next video, but I hope you guys enjoyed. There's so much more of this to come, so we are just getting started here. But if you guys have any problems with anything that you see in the video, please just let me know in the comments or the Discord section. I'm always happy to talk with you guys, let you guys kind of let me know what's happening so I can try and fix it. So just, one thing to bear in mind is that I'm always watching the Discord and I'm always watching the comment section. So if you guys have something you need to say or having a problem, please, 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 please just let me know. I literally look at that thing probably 3 times a day, if not more, because I don't like to miss any comments or questions that somebody might have. So again, let me know if you guys have any problems or if you guys enjoyed and found this helpful. I always like to hear that as well. But that's going to close out for today's video, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and as always, stay animated.